Yeah, for some reference on what each of those characters is like. So Jack, the character that I'd first mentioned that Juan just mentioned, is very by the time of the play is very open to meeting new people and very warm and friendly, and he feels to me like he should be like a teacher or something. Like he's a very warm and friendly guy who welcomes a lot of people in. The, the narrator in Acclamation can also be like that, but for the most part, he's going on a straight rant about why capitalism sucks and like the downfalls and pitfalls of it, and why like things need to change right now. He gets very riled up, like is kind of at 1,000 for the entire play. Um, and I think that bear with me as I'm going on this, but I think that in terms of playing the narrator as opposed to Jack, it's kind of like how what we're talking about right now, where it feels to me that there's both a blessing and a curse with social justice work, in that you need anything and everything to happen for the fight to work. Like you need both of those moments of being really angry and having a reason to be riled up and to try something like new and innovative, and at the same time you need something that's also that's much more sustainable. And at the end of the day, the goal that we're all driving for is again a healthy community, one that where people support each other and the systems that we have in the world support the people. So yeah, so to sort of broadly answer your question, it's funny of like of playing both of those things both in on stage and in real life, where it's okay, we need everything. There's room for the anger, there needs to be room for the anger, and there needs to be room for the sustainability as well.
In 1993, there was a riot in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, which is a neighborhood in Brooklyn, which has been home since the 1940s to both African Americans and Caribbean Americans and Hasidic Jews. Hasidic Jews are the very orthodox sect that sort of, well, in my opinion, are stuck in the 16th century. But that's neither here nor there. The point is that they coexisted, but with a lot of tensions and so on for decades. And then what happened one day was the chief rabbi of this particular Hasidic sect was coming back from visiting his predecessor's grave, and his driver of his limo either skipped or didn't see a red light and ran through it. And the car got out of control and went up on the street and ran over two black kids. Two little boys, a boy and his cousin. And the boy was killed and the cousin was severely injured. The first ambulance to get to the site was a Hasidic volunteer ambulance source. And they took the rabbi and his entourage to the hospital, and they left the two kids there on the street. Well, you can imagine the response of the Black community to that. And lots of young people, young men in particular, poured out onto the streets and were demanding justice, and were also angry and wanted to fight with the Jews. And so this went on for it was started one night, and boy, Dr. Phil, most of the Black leaders in the city, David Dinkins was then mayor, and Reverend Sharpton and many others met, but they basically talked to each other and tried to negotiate something with the top leadership. Dr. Filani, in contrast, spent literally the next 3 days and nights on the streets of Crown Heights, talking to the young people and the police and telling the young people, what are you going to do? They'll kill you. Don't attack the police. And her being very shocked and moved and impacted by them saying, so what if I die? What do I have to live for? At least I'll be dying for social justice. They didn't maybe use that word, but that's what they meant. And then she would say to the cops, wait, you don't want to get provoked. You don't want to kill anybody. And eventually somebody did get killed, but it was only one other person, a Hasidic student who was stabbed to death. But that event put Dr. Filani in an incredible position. Of course, she'd already been deeply respected by the Black community, but there were many cops who over the years would say to her, thank you, Dr. Filani. I was there at Crown Heights. You saved lives. You saved lives. And of course, to progressives, the event was very upsetting, because, especially to Jewish progressives like me, because, Jews in Europe were the persecuted minority, were the people who were excluded and faced endless violence for 2,000 years. And then to see Jews and African Americans, who are the primarily oppressed people in the United States, fighting each other rather than finding a way to work together, was very upsetting. So anyway, about 7 years later, I suggested to Fred Newman, who was then the artistic director of the Castillo Theater, and also the, if you will, political and intellectual leader of the movement that gave birth to the All-Stars and so on, that we do what we call learning plays. It was the 100th anniversary of this playwright, Bertolt Brecht, who came up with this form of plays in the 30s called the learning play, where he hoped the audience and the actors would learn through the process of producing the play. So I said, we should do a couple of Brecht's learning plays. And Fred, being the creative genius that he was, said, why don't we do our own learning play? And why don't we do it about Crown Heights? So he and I wrote the script for Crown Heights, which in some ways reenacted what happened that night in the first half. And in the second half is interesting. It's set in the prison, where the young man who stabbed the Hasidic student, the young Black man, and meets with his social worker in a series of meetings that go on over a while, who happens to be a woman 20 years a senior and Jewish, and they actually fall in love. So it's a very interesting and weird play, as most of things that Fred touched were. But that play we opened it in 73, and it was the first play we did at the new center on 42nd Street, and it was with young people. And we made a point of having a mixed cast and of casting across ethnicities. So there were Black kids who were playing Hasidic kids, and there were Jewish kids who were playing Black kids, and it was a real talk about learning. The 13 young people and Wanda, I know you lived through this, who went through that rehearsal process and performance process, learned a tremendous amount about New York City, about racism, about anti-Semitism, about the differences between the groups. And of course, it was very controversial. We got attacked a lot because we didn't toe the establishment line that it was just a Black riot against Jews, which was the primary narrative in the press. We saw it in the way that I described it, and a lot of people didn't like that, but some people did. And there were some beautiful moments in the lobby. I remember they were middle-aged at that time, so they were probably my age, Jewish and Black people who had said, "Oh, I haven't seen you in 20 years," and hugging each other. They both came because they were interested in the topic, but they had been separated by all this, these divisions among oppressed peoples. Anyway, that was, to answer your question, that was the Crown Heights, and that launched another youth program of the All-Stars, Youth on Stage, which went on to do about 30 productions with young people over the next 10 years or so. And I'm very proud of that work. And, it speaks to, again, to what Dylan's saying and you're saying, Wanda, about theater. I think theater can be an important activity in the social justice movement for a number of reasons. One is that it allows us to explore things that we can't otherwise explore, look at possibilities that are not very likely, have dialogues in ways that people can't outside of the theater. And the other really important thing about it is that it builds ensemble. When people work together to put on a play, they become very close, and they learn that creativity is collective, and they learn a lot from each other. So that ability to both have a playground of the imagination, I think, is really important for social change movements. And that experience of building ensemble, building a group, is, I think, also very key, to go back to the organizing question. And then in the case of the Castillo Theater and Youth on Stage, it was a particular power because all of that was tied to a larger community building effort that included, social justice and the All-Stars Town Show Network and independent politics. And it saw itself, and is, and what it was then and is now, part of a very long-term, multi-generational attempt to build environments for social justice and that. So the Castillo's theater always had a mix of professionally trained actors and amateurs, people who had never acted before. And we also, just ordinary people, learned how to run the lights and sound and act on stage and be the ushers and sell the tickets and organize the whole thing. And they built it. Ordinary people built that, working with theater professionals who wanted to also help change the world.